This video is sponsored by Best Buy, but not like the review. They didn't give me that. It's just this stuff. We'll talk about it later.
The reason PC handhelds have been so popular lately is because they give you a lot of extra versatility. The Nintendo Switch is popular because it forces some AAA games to be in a handheld form factor. Well, imagine if any game could be forced into that form factor, with even less compromise to visual fidelity or power. That's how we end up here in the PC handheld era. I got to play with the ROG Ally X about 2 months ago, along with some other YouTubers, but I didn't get a chance to play any actual games on it until just this week. I've had a lot of time to think about how much I like all of the changes that they made, but I finally now get a chance to actually test out those changes. This is not the device for people who already have a PC handheld, unless you're one of those people who like to get the new shiny thing no matter how much it costs. There's a lot of really small changes that don't really mean that much over last year's ROG Ally, but all of those changes do add up. It's a lot of little quality of life improvements. It's going to be hard to dethrone the Steam Deck as my go-to recommendation for people looking to play their Steam library portably. But if there's non-Steam games you're looking to play, or games that just won't run on the Linux system for any reason, the Ally X is the Windows device to get right now. If you don't already have a Windows device, of course. I already really liked last year's ROG Ally, so we're already off to a good baseline start. It was my go-to recommendation for people who wanted a Windows-based PC handheld. Mostly because I just really liked the form factor that it had compared to other Windows PC handhelds. Even though I probably have more playtime on the Lenovo Legion Go for whatever reason. Maybe the bigger screen, maybe the 2 USB-C and Thunderbolt 4 ports, maybe the faster RAM. Realistically, probably just because it came later and all my stuff was updated on it already. Well, here's a list that I wrote of all of the stuff that's been updated on this new ROG Ally X. First of all, it's now retailing at $800, which is about $100 more than last year's ROG Ally. The ROG Ally was known for frequently being on sale, and I'm sure you can find last year's version now for a lot cheaper than it once was. We're now jumping up from a 512 gigabyte small 2230 NVMe to a 1 terabyte full-size 2280. This mostly just means it's cheaper to replace, but also a larger size is now standard. From 16 gigabytes of LPDDR5 memory to 24 gigabytes of LPDDR5X RAM, which is more and faster, which should help pump just a few extra frames out of your games. From 40 watt hours of battery capacity to 80, that's double, giving you theoretically double the battery life, but double 1 hour is just 2 hours. Remember, PC handhelds, they need a lot of power, so you already don't get some great battery life out of them anyway. So I guess we'll take what we can get. The buttons have slightly moved, the thermals are slightly improved, the micro SD card slot has moved so it doesn't overheat. It's now black instead of white. I kind of like the white. And finally, the biggest quality of life improvement of all, a whole second USB-C port. It sounds really stupid, but having a whole second USB-C port does help a lot. It is actually a major quality of life improvement. These are PCs after all, so sometimes you want to plug in a mouse and a keyboard. Sometimes you want to charge the thing and also plug something in. And you couldn't do that in last year's ROG Ally unless you had a little dongle. Nobody loves dongles. One of these ports is just your run-of-the-mill USB-C. The one on the left is actually a USB 4 Thunderbolt 4 compatible USB-C port. This takes the place of that proprietary XG mobile port, which only worked with proprietary ASUS eGPUs, which were pretty expensive. Now, you can plug any Thunderbolt compatible eGPU into the new ROG Ally X, just like I've done in the past with my Lenovo Legion Go. Having an external GPU can get you so much more power with so many more peripherals. Is this practical? Not at all. Is this cool? I'm having fun, and that's all that matters. But that one port allows us to use the ROG Ally X, which is a handheld, remember, with a setup like this, forcing out a really high resolution and a really high frame rate.
By the way, the setup that I'm using with this crazy fast high-resolution gaming monitor is sponsored by Best Buy. I didn't have the ASUS ROG Ally X when I filmed this, but it works with the Lenovo Legion Go or any gaming handheld with USB-C. And everything that's here is pretty sick and works really well with this. Can you believe that they just let us have this? I know, right? Like, it was just a couple years ago we were making videos in my parents' basement. And then also I was sleeping in that basement. And then also there were floods in that basement and then crickets and spiders. Just stop. Okay, I'm sorry. It starts with the 32-inch LG Ultra Gear dual refresh OLED gaming monitor, capable of an insane 240 Hz in 4K or a whopping 480 Hz in full HD. So I can edit and play in 4K and switch over to the highest frame rate I've ever seen when getting serious and competitive. And a 0.03 millisecond response time. That's 0.03 milliseconds. You're not gonna get any lag with that. And it's OLED, so you get those super crisp black levels. This is going in my main setup as my main gaming monitor from now on. What game do you wanna play first? I wanna play Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales. Oh, that's cool. I wanna play Where in the World is Dr. Farkas? Where'd you get that one? I wanna play that one! Now, if you wanna make the most out of this monitor, you might need a little more than a gaming handheld. Plug it into an eGPU with a graphics card. That'll give you more of a desktop-like experience. Then you can utilize the full 4K 240 Hz or toggle it over to game mode, bringing it down to 1080p, but bringing up the frame rate to up to 480 frames per second. Now you'll be absolutely cracked. This monitor also has a little FPS counter. Most monitors have this these days, but they're not always accurate. This one at least gives you an up-to-date readout, not just what the computer is set to. This is a massive screen at 32 inches, but the game mode also has a mode where you can make the screen smaller. So I can bring it right up to my face like the pros do, and now I can be a pro. God. I like to have something to light up my desk. That's why we have this. Lighting this setup is a Litra Beam LX RGB gaming light, so I can see what I'm doing or light my face and hands so I can film at my desk. It can hang right over my monitor with its weighted base, change it to whatever color, or just leave it as a warm desk light. And if you need somewhere to put all of your work or your archived games, finally we have the WD Black 5TB P10 portable hard drive. That's more than enough space for a bunch of my video work or some games that I don't want to delete, but don't want to play right this second. Shop all of your gaming needs at bestbuy.com and click the links in the description below for any of these things that you might be interested in. Hey, let me play first. No way, man. You don't even know how to get past level 2. He's in the Paramus, New Jersey Pediatric Hospital. Oh, Paramus. Oh, wait, hold on. This is for PlayStation 5. Ah, shucks. You wanna go back to Best Buy? Nah, let's play something. Doesn't this thing have Space Pinball? Space Pinball! Space Pinball's fine. Give me Space Pinball.
I should note that this monitor does not have a USB-C port built into it, so you will need a dock or a dongle or an eGPU of some kind. What I'm using here is a Razer Chroma eGPU, which is Thunderbolt, and it has a 4070 Ti in it, which is like way overkill. We will get into eGPU performance, but before I get into that, we should just talk about using it as a handheld, because it is a handheld, and that's probably how most people are going to want to use this thing. The ROG Ally X sticks with the same Z1 Extreme processor that basically every PC handheld has, and that's for compatibility reasons. This Z1 Extreme has been so optimized and so well supported that it doesn't make much sense to upgrade it just yet. Games have been releasing with updates specifically for this architecture, and AMD is also releasing firmware updates whenever any major games come out. I have yet to want to play a game that just isn't playable on one of these PC handhelds, although I guess there's room for improvement in the performance of certain games. Both the original ROG Ally and this new one have a 1080p 120Hz screen, which is ridiculous for a handheld. Almost no games on the original ROG Ally take full advantage of that resolution and frame rate. That extra bit of RAM and that slight boost to RAM speed could, theoretically, give us an observable performance boost. But realistically, we're probably gonna see like a marginal increase to frame rate. It does perform slightly better in 3D Mark benchmark tests, scoring around 3400, where the old ROG Ally scores around 3200, which is actually a little higher than it scored just a few months ago. I guess those firmware updates are working. The Lenovo Legion Go also scores around 3200, which is weird because it has the faster RAM than the old Ally. This test shows us that something's better here, but it's just a marginal increase. Benchmarks don't really matter that much. We learned a lot from that MSI Claw video. We need to play some actual games on here to see what we're working with. Resident Evil 2 feels pretty stable at 1080p, getting around 50 frames per second, with some frame stuttering. I would honestly probably drop it down to 720p, which will get you around 70 frames per second. But maybe I would even lock this game to 60. You don't really need all those frames in Resident Evil 2. This performance is a noticeable improvement over the old ROG Ally, but of course, only marginal. Just a handful of frames different. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 runs actually pretty great on here. I left everything on minimum settings like I do on all of these devices, except at 1080p, I was getting 100 frames before the shaders even compiled. Around 110 frames after the shaders compiled. That's really close to the max refresh rate of the screen. I didn't even notice the shaders were compiling when I was playing. The whole time, it's been relatively steady. I think I'm mostly impressed because Call of Duty used to run like garbage on all of these different devices. It's not a very optimized game. I think the game has been updated a lot and it's become a lot more stable now. But make no mistake, that extra RAM is definitely helping the resolution and frame rate here. And this seems like a great time to mention the thumbsticks. I noticed this particularly while playing Call of Duty. My old ROG Ally had a weird kink in the left thumbstick. This was due to the cheap plastic construction of the stick gate. This new ROG Ally X alleviates this with a special coating around the shaft of the stick. It feels significantly smoother than my older one. Call of Duty does feel a lot nicer on here. Moving on to the first Descendant, this is just getting between 30 and 40 frames per second at 1080p at medium settings, depending on the environment. The hub world gets way lower. I actually did end up putting the first Descendant down to low settings, and I'm still getting 1080p at a respectable 50, 60 frames per second. It's not as pretty looking, but it does feel a lot smoother that way. But I can tell that this game is maxing out the ROG Ally X's resources. It's blowing a lot of air out the top.
When the first Descendant first launched, it didn't work on the Steam Deck due to some C++ Visual Studio situation. But now it gives you all the stuff that you need to run it, and it runs pretty much fine on low settings. It looks better on the ROG Ally X, but this is fine. And the frame rate is fine.
On the ROG Ally X, I would say maybe 2 hours of heavy gameplay will completely drain the battery. 2.5 if you're lucky. I managed to get somewhere around 2.5 or 3 hours out of this thing, bouncing around between different tasks, doing like benchmarking, playing a bunch of different types of games, sometimes idling on Windows, all at 25 watt TDP. So that's actually pretty good. Obviously, if you want to play something like Balatro, you can play this thing for a whole lot longer than that.
All of these tests and everything I've been doing on here has been at a full
25 watt
TDP, which is turbo mode on the little sidebar there. You could get a lot more battery life out of your ROG Ally X if you turn that down a little bit, but I would only do that for a game like Berserk Boy or anything that's low powered. I typically like to use these devices to their full potential as much as I can, and I'm usually around a charger when I'm playing them. I also am old, and I usually don't play these things for long play sessions anyway, usually like 45 minutes in bed right before I go to sleep. I have been caught on a long flight without a charger though, and that sucked. I've never really had any complaints about the thermals of the old ROG Ally. In fact, the Ally has always been one of the quietest handhelds. The Lenovo Legion Go gets hot to the touch and is also very loud. The Steam Deck is just loud. This new Ally X, you can hear it and it's definitely blowing, but it's barely above room noise.
Using an external GPU with this is a little bit insane. It's like basically having a desktop computer, and it's not as insanely loud while you're doing that as, say, the Lenovo Legion Go is. With Valorant, I'm pushing well over 200 frames per second in 4K, but Valorant is insanely well optimized and runs pretty good on everything. I was a bit disappointed by Call of Duty. That ran pretty bad. I had to switch it over to the GeForce drivers, then it still only got around 60 frames per second at minimum settings, and this was only rendering at 1080p. Even still, there were significant stutters, and it felt like I had some weird input lag or something. This isn't how it felt when I was playing it handheld at all. Resident Evil 4 is different. It did a weird thing at first, but then I switched it over to 4K just fine. Everything was fine and looked great on this nice LG monitor. It hovered between 70 to 80 frames per second, depending on what was happening on screen. It did have some stutters, but nothing game-breaking. Not as bad as Call of Duty. Having 2 USB ports is cool because I can have one for the eGPU and one for my mouse, keyboard, and all the other stuff in this setup. I was expecting this to perform a little better than the Lenovo Legion Go because of that little bit of extra RAM, but they performed pretty much the same. Just for the hell of it, I ran the 3D Mark benchmarks like this. The new ASUS got around 15,000. That's 5 times more than what it got without the eGPU, so that's pretty cool. But the Lenovo Legion Go got around the same after I restarted it. I'm not sure what this means for actual games, though. Probably not much at all. I didn't really notice a difference between the ASUS ROG Ally X plugged into the eGPU and the Lenovo Legion Go plugged in, except for just how insanely loud the Lenovo is. That little bit of extra RAM might help you on the Ally X if you're like video editing in a setup like this or doing other things besides gaming. For games and certain other tasks, you might be dealing with the bottleneck of the Thunderbolt 4 port. You're having a lot of power that's funneled all into one spot, which is fine. We're still getting a performance boost. Just if you're going to do a setup like this, you don't need to get a crazy GPU. I'm using a 4070 Super, and you don't need all of that. It's not going to utilize all of that. It seems like it's getting the same amount of power that it was when I had a 3060 Ti plugged in. So don't go crazy. Also, you might be saying to yourself, why don't you use an AMD GPU? Wouldn't that run better with the AMD processor? Well, I learned from doing this with the Lenovo that plugging in an AMD GPU, you need to do some tomfoolery with the drivers. Meanwhile, if you have an NVIDIA GPU, the drivers just know when you have a GPU plugged in to switch over to those drivers. It's actually easier with an NVIDIA GPU. It might not communicate as well, but it's a lot more user-friendly. I tested the input lag and added it to the chart of input lag tests that I have on all of these PC handhelds. It performed respectably, pretty much in line with the original ROG Ally, except for controller latency, which was actually significantly faster by an average of about 3 milliseconds overall. So not too bad. This slight little increase puts it among the best PC handhelds for latency, which is a nice job. I think they did change something to the way that the controller worked, but I'm not sure. I vaguely remember that from the press event. I didn't mess with emulation on here at all because I just didn't think that was very exciting. Every PC handheld with this Z1 Extreme processor performs pretty much the same. EmuDeck has gotten a lot better for Windows though, so it'll be a lot easier to put all of your emulators on here if you wanted to. But the big change over this ROG Ally X over last year's model is the micro SD card moved, and it shouldn't overheat on you anymore. So you can feel a lot better about keeping all of your ROMs on a micro SD card like I like to do. I like to separate them onto a separate drive.
So this is currently my favorite Windows-based PC handheld. I mean, last year's model was my favorite, and this one just makes all of the right improvements. The only thing that I don't love is that $800 price tag. I would have loved a $700 version that had the same RAM and storage as before. I guess the benefit here is that last year's model is going to be on sale for a significant discount now. In fact, it's already available at Best Buy for $650, which is $50 less than it retailed for last year. And I'm sure that it'll go on sale for even cheaper than that eventually. But I have to make the distinction that this is my favorite Windows-based PC handheld because I still love the OLED Steam Deck, and that is still my go-to recommendation if you're fine with playing Steam games and games that can run on that Linux platform. It's just so easy to download a game and start playing. There's usually not many settings to mess with either. However, not every game is compatible with the Linux OS of the Steam Deck, so a PC handheld like the ROG Ally X would have a wider compatibility. One of the things that drags a PC handheld down is the terrible UI. Windows is horrible for a handheld form factor, which requires PC handheld manufacturers to develop their own front end. ASUS's Armory Crate actually does a pretty decent job. It's the only PC handheld that I didn't immediately just replace the built-in front end with Steam Big Picture mode. Armory Crate has been revamped for this new version of the Ally, but it's always done a pretty decent job of just automatically showing you all of your games without you having to do much. It does a good job of loading in quick and staying out of the way when you don't want it, but it also, of course, lets you control the RGB, which is nice. If you are someone who has an ROG Ally from last year, I don't really think this is worth upgrading unless you really want a Thunderbolt port for an external eGPU. I can't see that being something that a lot of ROG Ally owners would need. If you're jonesing for an upgrade, I'd say wait till next year. There will probably be a newer model with a even better processor, the next generation of the Z1 Extreme, whatever that's going to be called. Maybe it'll even have a better screen. That's something that can improve this. If you're in the market for a Windows-based PC handheld right now, then yeah, you're going to probably want this version. If you are deciding between a Steam Deck and the ROG Ally X, that's a pretty big price difference. You should also just make a list of all of the games that would be compatible with the ROG Ally X and with the Steam Deck, and see which ones are going to play with what and which ones you're willing to compromise on, because not everything's going to work on the Steam Deck. Some games that have invasive anti-cheat will not work on the Steam Deck. Some games that require alternative launchers, like Fortnite, could work, but you have to check what type of tomfoolery you have to do to get it to work. I still love my Steam Deck for its ease of use, and that OLED screen is still light years better than this screen. It's kind of insane. The Steam Deck's screen is only 800p 90 Hz. This one is a whole 1080p 120 Hz. But the HDR and the deep colors of the OLED really do make a huge difference. I never thought I'd be one of these people that prefers this. But for games like Call of Duty or anything else that might be harder to get going on the Steam Deck, I'll be picking up the ROG Ally X, at least until the next thing comes out that I have to try and make a video on. So what do you guys think about the ROG Ally X and the newest PC handheld that everybody's got to talk about? Also, I think I should mention, I made a video when I previewed the ROG Ally X. I didn't get to play the games there, so that was a little lame. But I tried to get ahead of some controversy by talking about my stance on press events, because there were some YouTube videos around that time talking about press events, but that was in the camera world. I didn't think that the controversy around the ASUS press event was going to be about how ASUS has really bad customer service. I talked about that at the end of the video. I got ahead of the wrong controversy. A lot has happened since that video. ASUS has made a couple of statements talking about how they are gonna work harder on having better customer service. They're gonna extend the warranties of last year's ASUS Ally and presumably this one too. I think that a lot of these companies have horrible customer service. If that's something that really matters to you, I would suggest buying it from a reputable retailer that has their own warranty and their own customer service that you would have to deal with. Like Best Buy. Thanks for sponsoring this video. I appreciate it. I don't want that to sound like an excuse, because that is a big problem with a lot of these companies and I would like to see them improve. But a lot of times when I'm buying from these companies, especially the emulation handhelds, I'm taking a gamble. I feel like if something comes and it's broken, I just lost the gamble. You know what I mean? Unfortunately, this is a pretty expensive gamble. Anyway, let me know what you think about the Ally X. Leave it in the comments below. Add me on Twitter. Any social media garbage. Let me know if there's something about it that you would have liked me to try that I didn't. We got streams over on twitch.tv/Wulff. You can just talk to me directly there. It's like open office hours. Of course, the most important thing you can do to help support this channel is just subscribe right here. And you can click the bell so you know when every single new video goes live, and share this video with a friend who is interested in getting into the PC handheld game. this could be the thing. Thank you very much. Have a good week. I gotta play more First Descendant. I'm very behind.